Shabbat Shalom on this cold, wintry day. I hope you guys are cuddled up and you're warm enough and you're ready to take on this winter and make it through the cold. So we're into another parasha. This week's parasha is called Behaalotcha. It's a mouthful to try and pronounce, even in Ashkenazi, Behaalotcha. It's even more difficult. But this week's parasha can be summed up in one word, a good Yiddish word, kvetch, which means to moan or to groan or to complain. This entire parasha is a parasha about complaint and moaning. First of all, the mixed multitude moans about the food, which eventually influences the Israelites who start moaning about the food, saying, all we have to eat is this manna, we miss the cucumbers from Egypt and the leeks and all these wonderful things, right? So they moan about the manna, so eventually God decides to send them some meat because they asked for meat. And what happens? He sends them so much meat that they end up moaning even more about the meat. It's coming out of their noses. So the reward for moaning is more moaning, right? Then Moses, even Moses wasn't immune from moaning. He moans to Hashem in this week's parasha that it's just too much to look after these children of Israel. He says, am I the father of all of these children? Do I have to treat them like this and babysit them? It's too much to handle. So God eventually tells him to set up the Sanhedrin. But the moaning doesn't stop there. There's even a righteous type of moaning in this week's parasha, because there's a few guys who were unable to celebrate that very first Pesach in the desert. Why? Because they had corpse contamination. So they went to moan to Moses about this. And Moses said, just wait here, I'll find out by God what the deal is. And God gave us the instruction that you can have Pesach Sheni, the second Pesach, if you missed the original Pesach due to corpse contamination. Remember, there was guys that were carrying the bones of Joseph, so they would have been unkosher for Pesach. And also, some suggest it might have been the guys, the family of Aaron, who had to come take out his sons, Nadav and Avihu, after they got burnt up inside the tabernacle. So these people were suffering from the state of ritual contamination from a corpse. But the moaning doesn't end there, right? Later on in the parasha, Miriam moans to Aaron, her brother, about her other brother Moses. She says to him that God speaks to them as well. Why is Moses so special? Right? She questions the authority of Moses. And she goes on moaning about the wife of Moses, saying, he married a Cushite wife. And what happens to her for her moaning? She gets Lada'at. She is stricken with biblical leprosy. Right? So there's a lot of moaning going on in this week's parasha. And there's a famous Jewish joke that when you go to a regular restaurant, a non-kosher restaurant, a waitress will come up to your table and ask, is everything okay? But if you go to a Jewish restaurant where it's kosher food and there's Jews sitting in the restaurant, the waiter comes up to your table to ask, is anything okay? Because we moan so much. Mona Lisa must have been a Jewess. So this week's parasha hits very close to home for me because I love to complain. And I know that it doesn't help the situation when I complain, but it's still nice to express my feelings and my dissatisfaction out loud in front of an audience. For some reason, I just want to do that. And in a weird way, it makes me feel better, right, that I have a sympathetic ear listening to my complaints, as if their sympathy somehow makes the situation better, which obviously it doesn't, right? Because deep down inside, I know when I'm complaining that actually it is not good. What's coming out of my mouth is actually harmful. It's a form of evil speech, Lashon Hara, when we complain and when we moan. And it's damaging not just to ourselves, it's damaging to the people that hear us moan and complain as well. Because after all, no one likes to listen to a complainer, right? Me personally, I hate listening to someone complain, but I love complaining. It's a problem that I am trying to work on. And my poor wife has to suffer through it. But anyway, we as disciples of Yeshua are not supposed to be complainers. We have a special directive that when we suffer, we are not supposed to complain, because Yeshua himself died for crimes that he didn't commit, yet he did not complain. And we are trying to be like our master. So regardless of whether things are fair or unfair, we don't complain, because even Yeshua's death was for your sin and my sin, yet he didn't complain. Listen to this. This is from 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 19 to 23. This is our instruction not to complain when times get tough. It says, for it is a grace when someone, because he is mindful of God, so it's about being mindful of God, bears up under the pain of undeserved punishment. Right? I didn't deserve this. This is injustice. Sometimes we go through this. For what credit is there in bearing up under a beating that you deserve for doing something wrong? There's no credit in receiving the punishment for something you did wrong. right? But what about when you receive the punishment for something that you didn't do wrong? This is for God's sake, it says. But if you bear up under punishment, even though you have done what is right, God looks on it with favor. Indeed, this is what you were called to. Ever wonder what your calling in life is? It's to suffer without reason. Because the Messiah too has suffered on your behalf. Not on his own behalf, On your behalf he suffered. Leaving an example so that you should follow in his steps. So next time you want to complain about what's fair and not fair, zip it. Verse 22. He committed no sin, nor was any deceit found on his lips. When he was insulted, he didn't retaliate with insults or moaning or groaning. When he suffered, he didn't threaten, but handed them over to him who judges justly. So in this week's parasha, we find two individuals who lived lives like this and therefore merited divine revelation through the Holy Spirit. And they were able to prophesy without end, without measure. And they prophesied, according to our sages, even until the end of days. They saw the coming of Messiah in their prophecy. Who are these two people I'm speaking about? Their names are Eldad and Medad. So who were Eldad and Medad? I wanted to explore that today. Besides the fact that they've got really weird names, right? It sounds like some pair of twins in a cartoon. Eldad and Medad. Okay, so before I explain who they are, let's just outline the context of what happened when Moses had to choose the Sanhedrin, the 70 elders. So after Moses complains about the workload, God tells him to gather 70 of the leaders of Israel. And it specifically says, leaders of the people and officers of theirs. So here it is. This is a quote from Numbers 11 verse 24. It says, So Moses went out and told the people what the Lord had said. He brought together 70 of the elders and had them stand around the tent. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and spoke with him, and he took some of the power of the Spirit that was on him and put it on the 70 elders. When the Spirit rested on them, they prophesied, but did not do so again. Okay, so they prophesied that once, but did not do so again. We're carrying on with verse 26. However, two men, whose names were Eldad and Medad, had remained in the camp. They were listed among the elders, but did not go out of the tent. Yet the Spirit also rested on them, and they prophesied in the camp. A young man ran and told Moses, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. Joshua the son of Nun, who had been Moses' aide since his youth, spoke up and said, Moses, my Lord, stop them. But Moses replied, Are you jealous for my sake? I wish that all the Lord's people were prophets, and that the Lord would put his Spirit on them. Okay, so this is an interesting, slightly weird story that we're learning about here. So this helps us now moving forward in how to answer the question of who were Eldad and Medad. So when Moses had to choose those 70 leaders, he already had an idea of who to choose, because our nation, back when we were in Egypt, we already had leaders at that stage. We already had officers from the different tribes as our representatives when we were slaves in Egypt. That's why God says to Moses, go and choose officers, because we already know who the officers are. We've had them since the days of slavery. Now, according to Rashi, who quotes the Sifrei, these officers were the ones who were responsible for making sure in Egypt that we made enough bricks to match our daily quota or our weekly quota, however it was worked out back in those days. They were the guys that were in charge of making sure that we reach our quota. And when we didn't reach our quota for the day, it was these officers who took the beating for not reaching the quota instead of the rest of us. In fact, if they pointed out to the Egyptians that it was that Jew's fault that we didn't meet our quota because he was sluggish today and he was just chatting around and he didn't have his pup for breakfast, his jungle oats, then the Egyptians would actually go and beat that guy up. But they never did this. Our officers took the beating on behalf of the rest of the Jews if we never met our quota. And this is why in this week's parasha, they are the ones who merit being rewarded the seats on the Sanhedrin, that original Sanhedrin in this week's parasha. Because these are the type of people that, deserve a seat in the Sanhedrin. These are the guys you want over there. They are the governing body over our nation because they have proven that they care about the people, every single one of us. So much so that they are willing to be beaten for our sakes. What's the leader's number one job? The leader's number one job is to serve. Not to be a dictator over all the people, but to serve the people. And that's why these guys made the perfect leaders in our Sanhedrin. Right, but it goes even further than that. Eldad and Medad in this week's parasha went even beyond the letter of the law when it came to being a good person and looking out for those around them. Because they, in this week's parasha, gave up their right, so to speak, to the Sanhedrin for the sake of the rest of us. Listen to this. The Midrash points out that when Moses had to choose the 70 leaders for the Sanhedrin, it caused a bit of a problem. Have you ever been in a situation where, let's say maybe at school when you guys still had to do PT, right, a sports period, and the coach would say, okay, here's 2 captains, you guys choose teams from the whole class. And they would choose one by one until eventually you're left with the 2 people that no one wants to choose because they're useless at the sport. And you see how embarrassed these poor people are that they get chosen last. And you imagine how these people must have felt who always get chosen last for these sporting events. Well, this was the case when it came to choosing the 70 elders as well. Eldad and Medad noticed that there was a mathematical problem on the horizon. Because if Moses was to choose 70 people, 70 leaders out of the 12 tribes, how do you equally, democratically, get 70 people out of 12 tribes? The closest you can get is to get 72 people out of the 12 tribes, right? You take 6 leaders from each tribe, and then everyone's got 6 leaders and it's equal. But that means there's 2 people too many. So what happened? Well, Moses thought, he came up with a clever idea. He said, let's make a raffle. So what he did was he took 72 pieces of paper and he wrote the word elder on all 70 of the pieces, and he left 2 pieces of paper blank. And he put them in a bowl, and they had a whole Lotto live ceremony where you could come spin the wheel. And everyone took out a piece of paper, and then there would be 2 guys that have empty papers, and those would be the 2 that didn't make the cut. So that was the plan that Moses had in place. But Eldad and Medad were so concerned for the poor souls, the 2 guys that would end up getting the empty paper, that the 2 of them agreed to stay back behind in the camp so that it looks like they were the 2 that didn't get a paper with the name elder on it. They sacrificed their position in authority for the cause of someone else's feelings. These are amazing individuals. And because of that, because they cared so much for their fellows, they received an even greater reward than the rest of the Sanhedrin when the Spirit was poured out. Because the Torah records specifically upon those that were in the tabernacle, it says they prophesied, and then it says, and did not do so again. So that prophecy was a once-off prophecy. Right? The Spirit came upon you and you prophesied and you said something and it was gone. You couldn't prophesy anymore, but at least you were now part of the Sanhedrin. But when it comes to Eldad and Medad, there's a whole separate section in the Torah. There it just says they prophesied. And tradition says that their prophecy never ended. They got the Spirit without measure, so to speak. And tradition actually attributes them as some of the greatest prophets among Israel, this Eldad and Medad. There's even a tradition that says that they were the only 2, well, in addition to Joshua and Caleb, from that generation of Egypt that made it into the promised land. They actually have a source text where they say that these 2 made it into the promised land. That's an amazing thing. So these guys did a good job. But, it's weird to read Joshua's reaction to what happened in the story, right? Because Joshua hears about them prophesying outside the camp, and what does he do? He immediately goes and tattletales to Moses. He moans to Moses, actually. He says to Moses, make it stop. Why? Because he's worried about the authority of the Sanhedrin and the authority of the spirit of Moses being on those outside. And that is why Moses had to stop him in his tracks. Moses had to tell him basically that the Spirit of God is not meant to be only for a special elite club. Moses says, I wish that the Spirit of God would be poured out upon everyone, all of them. And by the way, that's the goal that we're all working towards. That's the Messianic era. Prophets tell us then the Spirit will be poured out on all flesh. Moses was hoping for that day. And that, by the way, is exactly what Eldad and Medad prophesied about while they were out there in the camp. They prophesied about the future and the coming of Messiah. Right? And we're never going to get to that future if we try and keep the Spirit of God, the revelation of Messiah, to ourselves. We need to be like Eldad and Medad, who are concerned not just for themselves and getting authority for themselves in a position of power. They were concerned for others, and they had a massive reward for that. The Spirit, even outside the camp, among the normal individuals. That's something that we are also hoping for. And there's a very similar story in the Gospels that teaches us, it's not just a similar story, but it teaches us the exact same lesson. I want to read to you guys from Mark chapter 9, verse 33 to 42. It says, they arrived at Capernaum. When Yeshua was inside the house, he asked them, what were you guys discussing as we were traveling? But they kept quiet, because on the way they had been arguing with each other about who was the greatest. Position of power. Who was the greatest, they were saying. I'm greater than you. I'm the better disciple. Jesus likes me more, right? You give me 2 pieces of bread. He sat down, summoned the 12, and said to them, if anyone wants to be first, he must make himself last of all and servant of all. He took a child and stood him among them. Then he put his arms around him and said to them, whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me. Yochanan said to him, Rabbi, we saw a man expelling demons in your name. And because he wasn't one of us, wasn't a chosen one, we told him to stop. But Yeshua said, don't stop him, because no one who works a miracle in my name will soon after be able to say something bad about me. For whoever is not against us is for us. Indeed, whoever gives you even a cup of water to drink because you came in the name of Messiah, yes, I tell you that he will certainly not lose his reward. So the disciples, they were tempted with pride as to who is the greatest among them, right? And they were trying to keep the authority of Messiah. That special gift from Yeshua that he gave to them, was he told them, I'm giving you guys the authority to go out and to heal the sick, to drive out demons. They were trying to keep that gift that Messiah gave them for themselves. When they saw that guy prophesying and driving out demons in the name of Yeshua, were they jealous for Yeshua's sake, or were they jealous for their own sake, saying, hey, that's my job, he gave me that power? That's the thing. They were jealous that someone else could drive out demons by the name of Yeshua. But Yeshua quickly corrected them, right? Saying, if you want to be first, you need to make yourself last and a servant unto all. That's what it means to have this great gift of Yeshua, is that we can be servants unto all. The rule of Messiah isn't meant only for the select few, right? It is meant for the entire world to become the kingdom under Messiah. Now, I don't think the point of the whole story in the Gospels is to encourage us to go make as many denominations as possible, as long as they just use the same name of Yeshua. I don't think that's the point of the story, right? The point of the story is the lesson that was taught to the disciples there. And the lesson that was given to the disciples is that we shouldn't want it all for ourselves. Don't keep it for yourself. And that is what Eldad and Medad are known for in this week's parashah. That they saw that there was a position of power and authority, and they decided they don't want someone else's feelings to be hurt, so they'll forfeit it and stay with the people. And the reward was, of course, that they were blessed. They were a blessing to the people. Now, in another place in the Gospel, Yeshua teaches us a similar idea, right? He tells us that we are not to keep our light concealed. He says, no one who has lit a lamp covers it with a bowl or puts it under a bed. No. He puts it up on a stand so that those coming may see the light. So it's not supposed to be a private society, us that have now discovered the connection between Yeshua and the Torah. It's meant to be a light that we shine to those around us. And that is a lesson that's reverberated in this week's parashah. Because in the beginning of this week's parashah, we have some of the laws concerning the lighting of the menorah. And the way that the Torah talks there is very weird. It says you shall light the wicks so that they shall shine light in front of the menorah. And it's like, what's going on here? What's the point? So there's a famous midrash that asks the question, does God need the light in the tabernacle? Is it so that he can see so he doesn't trip over something? No. The light in the tabernacle from the menorah is there for us. And I think this is communicated even better in Solomon's temple, because tradition says the way that Solomon built the temple, he built the windows in such a way that the inside of the windows was a smaller frame than the outside of the windows, so that the light would shine outwards more, because it doesn't need light from the outside to come into the house of God. The light inside the house of God, which is kind of like a metaphor for our lives, and the light inside of us, now that we have the Messiah, needs to shine out to those around us. They need to see the revelation of God, and we need to share that revelation of Messiah to those around us. So where does that leave us? Me and you, our congregation. Where does it leave us in the Messianic movement? We have a really great responsibility now that Hashem chose us and gave us the revelation of Messiah and the Torah. But at the same time, we have really great temptations that we have to overcome, that we can see in this week's parasha as well. There's a few lessons we can learn. Undoubtedly, right, we have a special treasure in our understanding of the Bible that our brothers and sisters in the church, for some reason, don't understand. Why they can't see the connection that we see when we study the Torah and we study the New Testament and the connection between them, why they can't see it, I have no idea. And similarly, right, we have a special gift in the fact that we can see the revelation of Messiah in the Torah that our brothers and sisters in the synagogues are not able to see. But we also have the same temptation as the disciples who were arguing about who was the greatest. Don't we also do that sometimes? Look at other friends in our Messianic movement or friends in Christianity and think that maybe we're better than them because we know more. We have the same temptation. Similarly, like Joshua, we have the temptation to get jealous if God works through channels other than ours. Why would God work through the Catholics? We get jealous of them. We have the same temptations. And like the leaders that were chosen to be part of the Sanhedrin in this week's parasha, we have that temptation to think that we are better than the rest. We need to be very careful. Eldad and Medad teach us to consider those around us. And maybe the only reason why we were chosen was for those around us. And when they did this, Eldad and Medad, they became the first fruits of those who received the Spirit outside of the tabernacle. You thought about that? So too we, followers of Yeshua, we are also the first fruits who have received the Spirit after what happened at Pentecost. We just celebrated Shavuot 2 weeks ago, right? But we shouldn't feel like we are better than everyone else. In fact, we should consider ourselves, what does Yeshua say? As the least, not the greatest. Why did God choose Moses? Out of all people, why Moses? Why did he choose Moses to be the leader of our nation? The one who witnessed the revelation of the Torah. The only person in history, other than Yeshua, to speak to God face to face. Was it because Moses was such a big macher? No. What does the Torah tell us in this week's parasha? It was because he was the most humble man on earth. So let me ask you this question. Now that you are Messianic, certified Messianic. Why did God choose you to reveal the truths of the Torah to and take you out of the church that you came from or wherever you came from before you joined us? Why did God choose you and not your parents, your grandparents? Why not your brothers and sisters? Why not your cousins? Many of us, most of us here, our whole families aren't into this. Why did God decide to choose you instead of the rest of them? Was it so that you can walk proudly above the rest and tell them how you know the Bible much better than them and you know about eating, not eating pig and stuff like this? Is the Torah for your own sake? Or do we study Torah for its own sake? It's a very good question. The reason that he chose you is to humble yourself with the revelation that has been revealed to you so that you can be a light to those around you. That's why he chose you. Our job is not to be the chosen ones, right? In our little group. And that we're going to be the remnant that's going to save this world. It's not our job. Our job is to serve those around us. Because our hope is that the Spirit will not only fall on us in our little congregation. Our hope is the Messianic era, that the Spirit will fall on all flesh, not just our friends and family, but all flesh. That is what we're aiming towards. Look what happened to poor old Miriam at the end of this week's parasha. She got jealous of Moses, saying, God spoke to us too. What makes him so special, right? And she ended up getting leprosy, right? Lada'at, and kicked out of the camp for at least a week, away from God. She was sent away from God and away from her fellows and her friends and her family. A person who considers himself as the least in his community, or congregation, or in the world, right? Spiritually or physically, that type of a person doesn't moan and doesn't complain about his wants or her wants, but what he deserves, what he is entitled to. We don't do that. He becomes the greatest only when he empties himself and looks out for those around him. That's why we were chosen. And we aim to follow the footsteps of Yeshua, because Yeshua didn't deserve what he had coming. He died for your sins, not his own. He died for my sins. Yet he still suffered and he didn't complain. So in this week that lies ahead of us, let us try and be like Eldad and Medad in this week's parasha. Let's not complain about what we deserve or what is rightly ours. Rather, let us share that special thing that we have, the gift of the Messiah, the revelation of Messiah. Let us share it with those around us. And in that way, we can usher in the Messianic era, where the Spirit will truly be poured out on all flesh. Shabbat Shalom.